Welcome to the American Iranian Council's interview series, Iran Chat. I'm your host, Stephanie Lester, and we'll be talking about all things related to Iran, its culture, and its people. Today we'll be speaking with Sufi musician Amir Vahab. He's one of New York's most celebrated and distinguished composers and vocalists of Sufi and folk music. He's performed at Lincoln Center, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the United Nations, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, and many others. He also teaches private and group classes at universities, libraries, museums, cultural centers, and at his own home studio, which is where we met for this conversation. About halfway through, you'll hear that Mr. Vahab is kind enough to demonstrate a few of the traditional Persian instruments that we were surrounded by as we spoke. For more information about these instruments, including others that we weren't quite able to include, and for more information about Mr. Vahab himself and his classes, you can go to his website, tambor.org, TANBOUR.org. And now, our conversation. So, Amir Vahab, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So maybe we can start with you just sharing a little bit about your background, where you were born, what your parents did, and how you first got interested in music.
Well, it's a long story, but I was born in Tehran, Iran, and my father was a colonel in the army of Shah, and I come from a family of 5 siblings, 4 brothers, 1 sister. Music was definitely from the very, very beginning, even before I was born. And I mean it in 2 different senses, physical sense and spiritual sense. Physical sense is, as you know, scientists have established now that babies do hear the sounds outside mother's womb. And my mother was very much into singing and listening to music, and her older sister played the violin. And I could hear that according to scientists. So that's on the physical sense. On the spiritual sense, if we believe in Rumi, the 13th century mystical poet, he believed in successive lives. So I believe that in my past life or lives, I've been a musician. So this is something that automatically I just was drawn to and went back to it.
Wow. Okay, so you started very early, even before this life. So, so you heard music even in the womb. Once you were born, is it something that your parents cultivated? Is it something even your siblings were interested in?
Absolutely. One of my oldest, I'm the youngest, by the way. So one of my older brother, he's a violin player. And he's 7 years older than me. And my mom, like I said, she's a poet, and she sings at home, sometimes for friends in friend gatherings, etc. So so I was exposed to a lot of singing and violin firsthand at home. Besides, being exposed to constantly listening to good music at home, because everybody had a taste for music. All the other brothers and sisters, they also love it, but some of them, the life did not permit enough time for them, like my oldest brother, who's a medical doctor. As you can imagine, it takes so much time, the amount of material they have to study. So he did not get a chance to get too much into it, but he was also singing and loving music as well.
It's wonderful. So you grew up in Tehran. How long were you there before you left?
I was there till I was 17.
Okay, so
Right.
that's so a longer time. So what are your main memories, even just growing up in Tehran when you were younger? I mean, even from a childhood, is it just like ice cream sticks in your mind or something?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I have wonderful memories. I don't know if that's with everyone, but childhood memories are usually very sweet. Everybody was young, everybody was there. You know, when you're a child, you are happy with very little. As you mentioned earlier on, just an ice cream or playing a game of backgammon, playing, soccer outside with the neighborhood kids, etc. So everybody was at home. We were all together, large family, 5 kids. My parents, my grandma used to live with us, so that was eight of us. We had a huge house, 4 stories, and it's like one family, 4 stories. So
Wow.
yeah, so when we needed, we would get together.
So you left when you were 17, and I understand you did a lot of traveling before you came here to the U.S. A lot of moving around. Where did you go, and why all the travels?
When I was in Iran, around the age of 17, 16, I started wondering. I guess there was so much curiosity about what the rest of the world is like. So I wanted to discover the rest of the world. It's like a fish that lives in a nice sized pool, but you feel like I have discovered almost everywhere or or everything about this pool, and you'd like to just go to a larger pond or even the sea. So definitely, undeniably, I had this curiosity that wanted to discover the rest of the world. Maybe this is a spirit of I don't know, Marco Polo or many of the people that have traveled must have had similar feelings. So I went to England first, and practically went to every city England has. My base was always London, where I studied on those days A levels and O levels. You probably don't know what they are.
No.
Yes, they are like equivalent of high school diploma and first 2 years of university here.
Okay.
So I wanted to study medicine and become a doctor like my oldest brother. Of course, that was a requirement from my dad. In Iran, there are only 2 jobs:
Uh-huh.
doctors and engineers. Nothing else exists. You can't become a carpenter or just like a Jewish family that they have 3. They have one more than us. They have the lawyers.
Lawyer. Uh-huh, yes.
I think recently we have adopted that too in Iran. So well, but I realized soon that I had more passion towards music and languages. So when I moved to France, I started the linguistics at the University of Paris. And well, I already spoke Persian and I knew some Turkish. Now I knew English and French. Then I started working on Spanish, and I took Arabic, and so now I know many languages, and a little bit of Italian and a little bit of German.
Wow.
So they say it's the same side of the brain that is responsible for music. It's responsible also for languages. So usually people that are good and have a good ear for music, they're said to be good at languages.
Did you, in your travels, study music as well as language?
Absolutely. In England, I was taking classical guitar, and in France, I was taking piano lessons. So mostly Western music, because even though that my specialty is Middle Eastern music, particularly Persian, but music is, it's all instruments and all music is related just like a large family. So I don't, in a larger scale, I don't separate them. And they certainly, good music nourishes the soul, so.
Understood. So maybe if you could just share a little bit about the type of music that you do, especially for people who may not even know what Persian music is. What makes something Persian music? And I know specifically your expertise is Sufi music. So how would you describe both and even distinguish them?
Well, most cultures have different kind of music within the culture. And Persian culture or Iranian culture is no exception to the rule. You have traditional music slash classical music in Persian music. Then you have folkloric music, which is the music that are still played in villages and small towns. Of course, ethnomusically speaking, all music derives from and stems from folkloric music, because we first came from small villages, then cities. If you study the history, cities were not born first, it was first villages. So this is why music is the same. Then you have spiritual music. Well, in the case of Iran, you would say Sufi music, because Sufism is not a religion, is the mystical dimension of Islam. Therefore, the spiritual music in Iran amongst the Muslims would be the Sufi music. Of course, you have minorities in Iran, Zoroastrians, which were the original religion of the Iranians. Incidentally, the first monotheistic religion before even Judaism, but not Abrahamic religion. And they have the mystical music as well, which is beautiful. Then, of course, you have the Jews and the Armenians and the Assyrians in Iran. They all have their beautiful music. You have about 2% Arabs in Iran, very little around the Persian Gulf. They have their music, which is very Arabic influenced. And you have some black people living in that region that are probably the reminiscence of older time that's still there. They speak Persian, but they're black. I meet them when I go to Chah Bahar, which is the region near Pakistan. So yes, it's quite a large variety. So you said, how are they different? First of all, again, by experts, Persian traditional music is considered also spiritual. One reason is because of the poetry. Most of the time, poetry used in Persian traditional music are by Hafiz and Rumi and Attar or even Baba Tahir. So this is amazing. If I speak the English from 1150 years ago, you would not be able to understand a single and simple sentence. Same goes for French, because languages are living beings and they're not stagnant and they're constantly moving and evolving. But Persian, because of our ties to poetry, Persians are very poetic. Every house has a book of Hafiz. And after that, they're likely to have Sadi and Rumi. So Rudaki is from 1150 years ago. And I can listen to Rudaki and understand practically every word. That's amazing, just from linguistic point of view, to be able to understand the language of 1,150 years ago. That's because there is not a day that goes by in Iran that people don't recite poetry. Even people in the past, because now most people are literate, but I remember 50 years ago, 40 years ago, the gardener that would come to fix our garden, he was from a small village, he was not literate. But from memory and from heart, he would recite line after line of, poetry of Rumi and Hafiz. And even as a child, I was like very impressed that this old man knows all these poems by heart.
I love that story. And I just want to ask, I know you just got back from Iran not too long ago. When you go, do you perform there, or are you just visiting family?
I really go to visit family. I wouldn't mind performing. I don't have much time to stay there because I have so many involvements here, and really even have hard time taking the 20 days off. If I go less than 20 days, my mother complains. My brother, I have still two brothers, they complain. My family. And if I go longer, then my students and my
It's a predicament.
manager complains. So I am caught between the two worlds. But yeah, so, you know, I try to go in and out, zoom in and out. And therefore, there is no time because it's time consuming to play with the local musicians. I like to arrange that maybe when I get retired or maybe I get older and I have more time, then I would do that over there. I would love that. There are fantastic musicians there, as you know. They have got so much better with traditional music since my time because I was there at the time of Shah. And I never saw the revolution. I never knew there was going to be a revolution. I left Iran 3 years before the revolution. I had no way of knowing. And first of all, everybody mocked me to play an Iranian instrument because we were so westernized. It was only cool to play the piano, the guitar, stuff like that. If you played the sitar, they would look at you like you were retarded. My own uncle, my own brothers, they looked like, you know, I could see in their face they feel sorry for me. Like, what's up with this kid? You know, he's playing Persian instruments.
You were like the dork?
I was the dork of the family. But I had a very strong soul. So, you know, these things did not affect me in the least. You know, like I totally could. I would dismiss it and even, you know, like smile back at them and dismiss them. So, yeah, it was not at all. So for my tambur, there was only one guy in Tehran with, well, now we have 16 million, is one of the largest city in the world, but then I was less, but still one guy was making tambur. And there was no case for tambur. We would put it in a pillowcase. So every Monday, you know, once a week, I would perform tambur in a you know, special friends gathering, and I would, you know, in the streets of Paris, I would travel with my tambur in a pillowcase, you know, because there was no hard case. Nobody would make a case because there was very few tambur made, and very few people played it. There was no business. As you know, is the law of demand and supply. So since there was no demand, it would not make sense. It would be not lucrative to make tambur cases. So nobody made tambur cases. But since, you know, now there are fantastic luthiers. You have hundreds of choices in sitar, in tar, in tambur. They're everyday soft case, medium cases, in between hybrid cases, hard cases, you know, for all these instruments, and you have so many choices. I mean, it's heaven now for someone who plays traditional Persian music.
So it's gotten cooler, it's gotten more popular, just...
Well, I guess because they started resisting. The first couple of years they said no music. If you recall, I mean, you're too young to remember that, perhaps. But he said no music. Then they realized it's ridiculous. It's like saying no breathing or no drinking water. You know, you can't stop everyone to do that. People totally dismissed that. Then they couldn't control it. Then they said, okay, play music, but play only spiritual music. Then, you know, the next move was like play Persian instruments. So they banned in the beginning, they banned the foreign instruments. So that was the third step. First, no music, then okay, play it, but play spiritual music, then play spiritual music, but make sure, it's Persian instruments, or at least Middle Eastern. So, but now, as you know, every instrument is allowed. Every corner musical instrument shop, they selling guitars, violins, cello, silver flute. So, and people learn, people play. There is no restriction at this point.
So I have to say, what the listeners can't see as we're sitting here is there's a whole bunch of instruments around us that I personally don't recognize. I am assuming these are all traditional Persian instruments. And I was wondering if you could maybe give kind of a crash course for the maybe the listeners that don't know what they are. Maybe even if you would be so kind as to provide an example of each of them.
Well, there's so many different instruments here. Sure. You have the traditional oud, of course. Then I have, the modern version. I can't help it because I live in New York, and, you have to go with the time. I also have the state-of-the-art electro acoustic oud, which has the, magnetic coils and onboard transducer and et cetera, et cetera.
So is that still considered a traditional Persian instrument once it's
no.
electric?
No.
Okay.
Good point. Like when I get invited by the Metropolitan Museum, I would never take that to the museum. But I also, sometimes jam with, younger crowd, or sometimes we do outdoor festivals, and you need to have an instrument that really very powerful and projects. Not long ago, I had a concert in Florida, in Miami. We had 6,000 people attending. That was an outdoor. So for that kind of a environment, a traditional instrument would not work as well. Then you have the sitar. The se in Persian means three, and tar in Persian means string or even strand. So you say taremu, like string of hair or a strand of hair. So that's totally Persian too. And even the Indian sitar, not the setar, is derivative of the Persian sitar. If you go to the musical department of Metropolitan Museum, they actually have old sitars and they have old sitars that you see is totally started very small, and they tell you that it's derivative of the sitar. And then you have another bowed instrument with a longer neck. The Sufis in Turkey, they use that. Is called the Rabab. There is, of course, Rabab, which is another old Persian instrument, nowadays more common in Afghanistan than even in Iran. Of course, it's coming back in the past decade or so. So Rabab is also a bowed instrument with 3 strings. Then you have Tambor, the oldest in the Middle East, and some argue is the oldest lute known on earth. Interestingly enough, Rostam, who is the grand warrior of the Persian history, and is mentioned over and over in Shahnameh, which means the Book of the Kings by Ferdowsi, was a player of tambur. I mean, who would think this amazing warrior, in you would think, a person, a very tough person in today's English, would not have this poetic and spiritual side, that every so often, park his horse and come out and and sit under a tree, under the shadow and play his instrument. But yes, they actually have smaller versions of this and have had it in historically that would fit into the saddle, so it was like traveling instrument. Then there is more, but I'm going to kind of reduce them. Then of course you have the Neigh. Neigh is the reed flute. Persian reed flute is modeled after David's flute. David, here we say King David, who was a Hebrew, one of the Hebrew prophets, and is mentioned in the Quran and mentioned in the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, everywhere. He was a poet, of course, a king, and he was an amazing musician and an amazing inventor of many musical instruments. For one, the David's harp, the harp that was on those days created from animal's head and horn, which is named after him, David's harp. And his neigh, or his flute, had 7 joints and 7 holes, sound holes. So Persian neigh is modeled after his neigh. There are Arabic neighs and Turkish neigh which has 9 joints to them and also have 1 extra hole. So the neigh is said to have the highest, or one of the highest, therapeutical effect on human body and soul, and possibly psyche. I separate them for a reason, but that's too lengthy. The ancient Greeks would have music chambers, and this is BC, before Christ. So imagine, over 2,000 years ago, the Greeks had music chambers that would function under the cost of government, and they would have several times a day music provided free to the public, for the citizens to just go there and expose themselves, just like you take a sunbathe, to the rays of the music, and enjoy and become healthy, etc.
Do you think we should have that today?
I always suggest that in every concert I do, and you're into politics, so you should push this into our governments to provide music. Not only we don't have that, but every year, for the past decade or so, out of the 40 years I'm here in the West, but past 10 years, there's more and more budget is being cut from all artistic areas, including music and cultural things. So that's so much for the Neigh.
I should just share that the Neigh actually has a special place in my heart. When I first traveled to Iran when I was 16, it's the instrument that I remember hearing and thinking, oh wow, that is beautiful. I've never heard anything like that. And I remember asking our guide if he could please send me a tape back to the U.S. when I got back so I could listen to this instrument. And he never did. And I kept waiting for that to be in the mail, because I really just fell in love with that instrument when I was there the first time.
Absolutely. Rumi says some 800 plus years ago, بشنو از نی چون حکایت می کند و از جدایی ها شکایت می کند که از نیستان تا مرا ببریده اند از نفیرم مرد و زن نالیده اند. He says, listen to the reed, how it recounts the story of separation, how it moans from the time it was cut off from the reed bed, etc., etc. So he actually starts his book with this poem, which is amazing. So it has a very special place amongst the mystics of Islam. Then you have the tar. Now the tar, T-A-R, became the Iranian national instrument, just like the saz that became Turkish national instrument. Tar is the Iranian national instrument with 6 strings, and as, the soundboard is made out of skin, just like the banjo, the Irish banjo, for instance.
So thank you so much for the tour of all of these wonderful instruments. I should ask, are any of these used in music outside of Persian music? Are we ever going to hear Katy Perry playing any of these?
You mean outside Iran?
Well, outside of traditional Persian music, obviously, I mean, they're played here. You play them here in the U.S. Right. But will you hear, an American band picking one of these up and using them in their music?
Yes, absolutely. And the reason I know this is because I have many students. At this point, more than half of my students are American, and many amongst them are already professional musicians. So, and they use these things. They're using Kamanche in bands. They're using the Tambor. They're using the tar. They're using the Neigh. I mean, it's still not that popular that average American would hear it all the time. But in some, maybe more specialized concerts, they have been using them. Yes.
I wonder, as you're teaching, or even just for people generally, I just wonder, do you think that there's something that people can learn about Iran as a country from either listening to or learning about Persian music?
Of course. I think it's Rumi who says, Darsi nabovat, har anche darsi nabovat. Notice he's playing also with words, because darsi nabovat, har anche darsi nabovat. So it's like, sounds like repeating the same thing twice. But first time he says darsi nabovat means it's not like a lesson. Har anche dar sine, sine means chest, bovat. He says not everything that is in one's chest could be transferred like a lesson. It's very deep. Think about it. So here we say to read in between the lines. Persian music has, first of all, at least 5,000 years. We know we've been there for at least 8,000 years. Now, as the archaeology develops and we keep finding things in the land, what we call Iran today, it's so evident now to the archaeologists that we've been there for 8,000 years, living in had civilizations. We keep finding more and more evidence, hard evidence, that are in the museums now. So the music it talks about, these are some of the memories, the culture that travel chest to chest. You see, you can't rely completely on the recordings or the written material, but our senses, tell you a lot sometimes. Again, going back to Rumi says, پنج حسی هست جز این پنج حس آن ز زر سرخ و این ماند چو مس. There are other five senses than the five senses that you know, one like the pink gold and the other like just the copper. So Rumi argues that there are 10 senses, that we only have discovered the 6. There is 4 more to be discovered yet. And as you develop your inner self, you will get to know about the entire 10 senses. So when you listen to music of a culture, you can tell a lot, sometimes not at the level of intellect or brain, but definitely in an internal level of feelings, psyche, and even further deep in your soul. So Persian music is very mystical, because we were mystical before Islam, even amongst the Zoroastrians. A lot of the mysticism still there, in the form of Sufism. Of course, Sufism naturally brought this and updated it. But all authentic religions, such as Judaism, such as Christianity, such as Buddhism, such as Zoroastrianism, they always had this mysticism within them. And Persian music is definitely by experts considered a mystical music, and talks about the long history and millennia of knowledge, inner knowledge, external knowledge, experience. And then Persians are very poetic. Again, that's known. Look at the amount of poetry we have in Iran. Look at the Iranians in diaspora. We always have the night of poetry. Show me other nations that they have this. There is not a week that goes by that we don't have poetry night. We call it Shab-e-Sher. Once in a while, we have outside open to public, but more than every week we have it amongst each other. It just rotates in people's house. So we have it one in Long Island, we have it in New Jersey, we have it in Manhattan, we have it in California, all over, wherever the Persians are, in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. So we constantly have Shab-e-Sher, which is Night of Poetry. We sit around, we recite them, we sing them. We love poetry.
So you talk about this huge influence of poetry. I wonder if you can share a little bit about the process you go through in creating your music. What inspires you? Do you sit down? Do you read some Rumi? Do you read some Hafez? Do you go for a walk? Do you just sleep and then you wake up and it comes to you? What is your process for creating music?
Yeah, different time, different ways. But almost everything you said is true. Sometimes a line of poetry triggers my soul, and I compose some music. Sometimes I'm just walking. It has happened to me, and it will come to me. I remember summer days when in the 80s I was still studying and just walking in the streets, and then melodies would just come to me, would just come down to me. I say come down because I believe before we get them, they are in the spiritual world up there. I don't want to take credit. I composed many songs. I also am a poet. I write poetry, and I have written already maybe over 500 lines of poetry. But to me, there is when we say discover, there is a difference between creating and discovering. So my humble belief is these melodies are out there in that vast world of existence. And I'm talking about the cosmos, I'm talking about the universe. We are just a small little planet, smaller than a speck of dust in the universe. Even our galaxy is as small as a speck of dust. Never mind our planet. So I believe it's there, and then when you are ready, you can absorb and capture these melodies. That's why, I refrain from saying I created these melodies, but I discovered, I had the honor of receiving them. So, and we receive them when we connect with the universe. So that happens sometimes when I was walking. Sometimes I remember one of the melody, I still remember which melody, but I remember waking up at dawn to meditate at 3 a.m. and this melody came to me in 1985. And 2 weeks later, it was on the stage, being performed, and it was such a success. Everybody loved it. So yeah, they come in different ways, in different manners, but they all come from above.
So you mentioned your students, and I know you do group lessons and you do private lessons. Are your students learning well? What do you find is the hardest really to teach, and what do people usually pick up on more easily?
Not everybody is cut to be a teacher. You have to have a lot of patience, and you have to put yourself into their shoes, really, to be a good teacher. But it could be maybe a gift that is given to us by our Creator, or it's complex. Some of it is techniques and methods that is taught to us to be a teacher, and so on. But to put it in short and simple sentence, Some people are very knowledgeable, but they don't have the ability to transfer their knowledge to others. And some people maybe know little, but they have this gift of being able to transfer their knowledge to the others. So if of course one has both, that would be the ideal. Now, so that's why you see, rather than focusing on the students, I focused on the teacher. I think it's the job of teachers to teach, rather than saying, well, you're not a good student, so many of them are not good, Many of my colleagues say, oh, Mr. Vahab, 9 out of 10, they drop out anyway. And I said, well, not really. With me, 9 out of 10 actually stay. And even that 1 out of 10 that drop, later on I found out that the job got transferred, or they had family issues and problems, etc. So, it's important. I think it's the job of the teachers to make sure what they teach is absorbable and they could be assimilated by the students. This is very important.
So I'm sure maybe this is a question some of your students ask you, and maybe something that some of our listeners may be wondering. I'm curious just how you kind of came on this path of being able to be a full-time musician, because obviously there are a lot of people out there who want to do that. They're told it's too difficult, they're dreaming. They want to be a full-time discoverer, as you put it. Do you have any recommendations for anybody listening that wants to do this for their career?
Yes, it was planned way ahead of time. I hear that being a musician and being a music teacher even more often, and you put your finger on it, it's true. There is not a day that goes by that one of the students says, I wish I could just be a musician or make a living out of music. It's very difficult, and I suppose it becoming even increasingly more difficult to just make a living out of music. So it is a dilemma. It is a serious problem for many music lovers. I was told by my spiritual teacher years back, decades back in Iran, to at least then make sure to have other skills and sources of income, so I do not become solely dependent on the money that comes from music or performing music or teaching music. The reason was even deeper than what you're saying, because if making money through music is your only source of income, sooner or later, you need to put some food on the table and pay your rent or expenses or whatever, bills. So then you become slowly but surely a powerless slave to your audience. And you have to play what they want because you need the money. So I listened to this advice, and I told you I am a linguist, and I am a micromechanical engineer, which I did later on in Switzerland. I studied after France. I went for a year in Switzerland. I started micromechanical engineering there first year. Then I transferred the next 3 years here in New York and graduated in 1984 as a micromechanical engineer. So I used these two skills plus my other skills of teaching English, teaching, etc. So I made my money through my skills, and did music really just for my own soul and the development of my soul. And I made money a little bit. It was only 14 years ago when my lease was over and And by then I have already worked 24 years in micromechanical engineering, owning my own business on Fifth Avenue, by the way. So I said, well, you probably know when you work for yourself, you end up working more. So I used to work, first 4 years I worked 7 days a week. The rest of the 18 years I took it easy and I worked 6 days a week. So, but it didn't feel bad because you are your own boss, you work for yourself, and I loved what I did. I only had Sundays for music, and in those Sundays, I would teach. I had at least 10 students. Sometimes I would see my students even at work. They would come to my office and then take a lesson in between the customers and clients. And I would still have an average of 10 concerts a year. So when my lease was over, I said, I like to take a break of 3 months because I was going to change my office to even a better, office. I had the best location. You can have an office better location than Fifth Avenue corner of 47th Street, which is the Diamond District. And so I took 3 months off, and immediately my students rised from 10 to 20, 30, 40, 50, and the concerts from 10 concerts a year to 40, 50 and up. I said, well, I still did not have any intention of stopping, but I said, let's prolong this leave of absence, maybe another 3 months. So, and then again, the students and the concerts rise more and more and more. Now I do average of 65 concerts a year, and I have over 200 students. So soon I realized that, I certainly could just do this and that would be fine. I would make less money than what I would, from my business. But money is just money, and we're not getting any younger. And if you have enough, maybe you can do what you love the best. So I said, okay, let's take another 6 months, which brings it to total of a year, and just do music and see what happens. And still on the rise, more students, more concerts. After a year, I made a decision not to go back, not to ever go back, but, just to do less of the micromechanical engineering. I still have some private contract with some of the big businesses I had. Also not to forget my skills because I love that too. But now I do 95% music, just performing and teaching. I also design new instruments that I like to at some point start maybe making lutes, and have a workshop, invent new instruments like David did. So, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my passion.
So it sounds like you don't look back. In fact, you're looking to the future.
Indeed.
Well, Amir Vahab, I really enjoyed speaking with you today and learning about Persian music. I should ask, are you working on any albums that we should keep an eye out for?
Yes, I already have 7 albums to my credit, which is on my website, tambor.org. But I'm working on the 8th one. Keep your fingers crossed. You can't tell exactly when because it's not done until it's done. I mean, the finishing touches. But I can say, keep your eyes open for the 8th album to come out.
We absolutely will. So thank you so much. Again, I appreciate your speaking with me today, and Khuda Hafez.
Khuda Hafez.
You've been listening to the American Iranian Council's interview series, Iran Chat. You can find more about our work, including other interviews, at us-iran.org. You can find more about Amir Vahab on his website, tambor.org. We'd also like to thank Amir Vahab for providing the music that we're using for this series' introduction and closure. Speaking of which, you can enjoy more of that now.
همه با